We in the killing Nazi business and cousin business is a booming.
That's a bingo. What's up, movie friends? Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost podcast. I'm Anthony.
And this is James. Today we're going to be doing Inglourious Basterds, which came out in 2009, written and directed by the great Quentin Tarantino. Inglourious Basterds is actually ranked 85th all-time on the IMDb user all-time rankings. In Nazi-occupied France during World War II, a plan to assassinate Nazi leaders by a group of Jewish U.S. soldiers coincides with the theater owner's vengeful plans for the same.
Tarantino, we've talked about him numerous times on this podcast, and he's obviously one of our favorite directors. I think he could be the most famous director around the world currently that's living. And I think that Inglourious Basterds is his best movie. I think all around, the script, the production, the acting, the music, the tone, and the story itself, I think is a highlight in his crazy good filmography. And he's made so many great movies that you can go to people and be like, what's your favorite Tarantino movie? And they'll say a different one every time. So he has an eclectic filmography, but I think Inglourious Basterds is the top of the list.
I actually agree. I think Inglourious is probably his best movie all around, but I think that Pulp Fiction is his greatest movie, and I think the best and greatest are different here. You know, best is like all around production-wise, script, everything that has to do with the film, it's his best made film. But I think in terms of impact on cinema and in terms of just his greatest film, it's got to be Pulp Fiction for me. But I would say that Inglourious is probably number 2 on the list.
You make a good point, because he did change the way movies could be depicted and how people thought about movies with Pulp Fiction. It was a really big game changer at the time. And also, it being his second movie, that catapulted him into the fame he now knows, because Reservoir Dogs was very much critically loved and was pretty successful. But when that came out, it was like, wow, this movie's amazing. Here's this new director with this film Reservoir Dogs. But then Pulp Fiction put him on the map of being one of the preeminent directors on the entire planet. So I could definitely agree with you there, but I just think Inglourious is a special movie, I think.
The best way to support Raiders of the Lost podcast is become a patron at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast. Patrons get perks like messages, personalized videos, podcast schedules, and the top tier patrons get a monthly shout out on the podcast. Also, head on over to our brand new website, RaidersOfTheLostPodcast.com, to check out all of our sources of content, as well as all of our merch. We've got hats, t-shirts, stickers. We also have custom movie posters that you can get from us. So head on over to our new website, become a patron, support the show. We appreciate everyone who does and has gotten some merch so far. Easily his best screenplay. Like, I know Django's great, and that's what he won his Oscar for. But when it comes down to just dialogue, this might be the most exquisite film he's ever written, maybe of the last 30-40 years, because the dialogue is amazing. It comes off like a play at times, and it's so eloquent, and all the characters are so well spoken. And obviously one of the best parts of the film is it's spoken with 4 different languages, I think.
Yeah, 4.
So Italian, English, French, and German for the most part.
Only about a quarter of the film is in English,
which I love. I don't mind subtitles at all if it's a foreign film.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah,
because of the characters.
And I love that part of it, because, you know, we're set in Europe. It's World War II, so a lot of people in Europe obviously speak languages besides English. Unlike those Americans that only speak. Do you speak any other language besides English? Besides English, you Americans. So I think that it's accurate to the location, the time period, and the characters, and how realistic it would be.
And Inglourious, he actually had been working on for 10 years. He was actually working on this script in the 90s, in early 2000s, and he had planned to make this before Kill Bill, but then he couldn't figure out a good enough ending for it. And so he moved on and shot the Kill Bill franchise instead. So he's had this concept and story in his mind for a very long time, and I think it wasn't until the mid-2000s where he really started fleshing it out until it was ready to produce. But also, there was a major influence on this film being as good as it was. Paul Thomas Anderson is very good friends with Tarantino, and they've been. You told the story about how they first met, kind of because of people talking about them being similar, and they communicated and met up because of that. And since then, they became very close friends. And then when Tarantino watched Paul Thomas Anderson's film There Will Be Blood, which came out 2 years before Inglourious, in 2007, he was so blown away by it and impressed by it, and also intimidated by it. It inspired him to make Inglourious Basterds as good as he possibly could, because I think there was a point where maybe it wasn't quite the caliber of being a masterpiece. I think it might have been a little bit more fun and playful in terms of the story and the and the tone of it. But then after seeing There Will Be Blood, it inspired Tarantino to be like, okay, PTA did that. I have to try and top him with this movie. Hey everyone, do you want to be a guest on Raiders of the Lost podcast?
We're doing a special giveaway for you to be on our show for Patreon members of Raiders of the Lost podcast.
So if you're already a member of our Patreon, we love you and you are already entered into this contest. If you aren't a Patreon on our Patreon, all you gotta do is sign up for one of the tiers. We have a $2 tier, a $5 tier, and a $10 tier, each with different perks. If you sign up on our Patreon, we will enter you into the contest to become a guest on our show.
We'll give you 1 week to become a patron and enter this contest. Go to patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast to become a patron today. Yeah, and also Inglourious marked this new kind of trademark for Tarantino in his career where as a filmmaker, he's been since then going into past historical events or time periods, making period pieces, and he's obsessed now in a way with rewriting history and rewriting the past. He's done it in several films since then. I mean, obviously Hateful Eight isn't like that, but it is going into the past. And then Django, it's not rewriting history, but it is exploring a time in the past.
I could say it's rewriting. You can say that.
In a way.
No slave had ever done that. So you can say that it's rewriting history.
So, but it's just something that he seems to be doing a lot. And also Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is going back in time and rewriting history.
Yeah. Why do you think he rewrites history?
I think that maybe it's not that he's having trouble coming up with original ideas, but maybe he's just so fascinated with history. And then you always imagine what would happen in the world, or how would we be living today if this happened? You know, what would happen if Carthage overtook Rome? What would happen if Nazis won World War II? So maybe he loves that idea and fascination, or maybe if you just the butterfly effect, you tweak one thing in the past and it can set up the history for a different reality.
And on top of that, if you notice, all of the changes he makes to history change tragedies into moments of victory or triumph. And we've talked about before, how he likes to turn the oppressors into the oppressors of the people who used to oppress them. And he seems to be fascinated with changing great tragedies. So with this film, he wants to change the tragedy of the Holocaust into being a victory very much early on in the war, before too many people were killed. And also he changed the history of a slave like Django taking control of his life. And then Once Upon a Time, he changed the tragic history of Sharon Tate and those other people being murdered by the Charles Manson's gang. And so I think that there's actually kind of an emotional and personal touch to this part of Tarantino's career, where I think he's getting more personal. And although it doesn't look like it's a personal film, maybe he just feels so impacted by tragic moments. He's like, you know what? I want to change this and make it something positive and victorious out of these huge tragedies in history. And also, I think he just likes giving a middle finger to the Nazis whenever he can. I mean, he does it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when he doesn't really have to do that. Yeah. With the scene with the Mikulski's movie, he just torches them up with a flamethrower, and they shoot Hitler 1,000 times. Yeah, like machine gun. So there's something about him wanting to get revenge, like you said, making the oppressed the new oppressors of the ones who were oppressing them. And then earlier you pointed out how this is a period piece, and it marked a change in his career trajectory where he only made period pieces starting with this film, because before this, his last movie was Death Proof, and before that, all of his movies were contemporary, based upon the time. They're in the 90s and early 2000s, and so he had never done a period piece until Inglourious, and then he only did period pieces. And I think the reason for that is because he likes to, and Paul Thomas Anderson, the same thing. Once he started with There Will Be Blood, then it's only period pieces from then on out. And only really single character-driven storylines versus ensembles for PTA. Yeah, but I'm talking just period. And I think the reason for that is they try to avoid technology. And I think they find that storytelling is easier, and you have a lot more ability to really do whatever you want with period pieces, as opposed to now, if you write a story with a conflict, most conflicts can be solved with a smartphone. And so that kind of eliminates your ability and the freedom to make a well-crafted, intricately woven story with all these interesting beats. And so it eliminates so many possibilities having a smartphone. So I think they enjoy writing in the space outside of the contemporary technology we have. I think it makes the films more timeless as well, too. It's more like an artifact that'll last longer and will still be enjoyable in 50 years because it doesn't have the technology of today in it. And in Bastards,
it does everything that you want in a movie from Tarantino. It's got humor and comedy. It's dramatic. It's got gore. It's very witty. The dialogue is sensational. Revisionist history, obviously, which is his new MO. And then also solid action. But the way this film was advertised before it was coming out, remember the trailers and all the ads and everything, and the marketing campaign was like, oh, this is going to be a super intense action film. And like every scene was like the bar scene with the shootout that was in the trailer. And you thought that, oh, there's going to be guns everywhere. But when you watch the film, there's hardly really any action going on in the scenes. It's a lot of dialogue, which I love so much about it.
And the action that does take place lasts a few seconds at least, because you have the shooting in La Petite's home, which lasts like 5 seconds, and then you have the bar shootout, which lasts like 10 seconds, and then you have the bastards freeing Hugo Stiglitz, which lasts like 2 seconds, and then the final firefight, which you wouldn't really call it a firefight, it's more of a slaughter, so I wouldn't say it's an action scene. I would say it's like
there's not a ton of actual scenes because so many last for so long, which is amazing. I mean, the opening scene, it's 19 minutes. The pub scene, that's 15 minutes. Just those 2 scenes alone, that's almost half of a movie in itself.
That's an entire episode of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, pretty much. No, that's like, yeah, you're right. Almost I don't know, 35 minutes right there, 34 minutes. And so the low number of scenes, it's what creates this intimate experience for the audience member. It really pulls you and puts you into that world that Tarantino's created, and it really makes you get a sense of the characters so much more by watching them talk so much, and because the dialogue is so good, you don't mind it at all.
That's always been Tarantino's style, except for, I would say, maybe the Kill Bill movies have more scenes than usual for him, but otherwise, every other movie, whether it be Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction, even Jackie Brown, Death Proof, they have very long scenes and very few number of scenes. And he likes to do that because it's the same thing as shooting with a long take of a camera. Like, it pulls you into the movie more and keeps you invested in the characters and the story that's unfolding in front of you because you're not cutting to a new moment or location. So I think the longer you can stay in a scene while keeping the audience's attention without them growing bored, the stronger of a storyteller you are. And clearly he is the strongest storyteller there is.
Probably. And this film obviously takes place during one of the most troubled times in modern history, probably the scariest moment in world history. And, Nazi Germany at this point, they'd occupied 20 countries and they didn't plan on stopping. And, I think just a little background on why did Hitler invade France? Germany realized that war with Russia meant war with France, so it planned an immediate attack on France through Belgium, hoping for a quick victory before the slow-moving Russians could become a factor. And also is a strategic point for when they would eventually go after Great Britain in the UK.
They actually took France in only a few days. Their army was so powerful and so high in technology at the time that France was completely overwhelmed by them. And it literally took them a matter of, I think, maybe 3 days to take over France. It's crazy how fast it happened.
Yeah, this is a sensitive topic, obviously, when you have so much Nazi symbology on camera and you're depicting Hitler. Obviously, he does it in a comedic way to make fun of him clearly. But also, you have to be aware that it's going to affect people, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't fans of the film. They're not really fans of even just seeing Nazis on camera in general. So, but I think you got to understand it's just a movie. He's just telling a story, and if that's not for you, you just don't watch it.
I would say if people aren't fans of this movie, it would be because of the tone. Because a lot of people might think he's like poking fun at the Holocaust, which is not what he's doing. He's just telling the story in a different way. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that it was very refreshing, and it's just liberating to see. I mean, yes, the Allies did win the war eventually, but not until millions died. And I think it was refreshing to see the war end so quickly in this movie before too much damage had been done.
And one of the best parts of the film, I think, is the music, and a lot of it is Ennio Morricone's music, which he didn't make it for the film. It's just it's like how he used Ennio's music for Kill Bill, those 2 films, and some of his other projects, and Hateful Eight. These are music that you've heard in the spaghetti westerns from the past and The Thing. So, well, actually, no, that was for
Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight was for The Thing. So, but I just love Ennio Morricone, and he brings, again, that Western vibe that you love to see in Quentin Tarantino movies, and then also the Western vibe set in World War II. It's just a really cool aesthetic and atmosphere.
But then also adding contemporary music too, like contemporary to our times, which he also did in Hateful Eight and in Django as well. So that makes the
like
tone,
David Bowie, Cat People.
Yeah, that makes the tone of the movie like it kind of becomes like its own thing. It's not just a period piece. You know what I mean?
He also does this thing in this film where whenever there's a moment of deep tension, he'll just ramp up like an instrumental guitar or just instrumental drums and bass, and it makes a moment so much more intense, especially with scenes with Hans Landa. And then he also will cut the music abruptly when he changes scenes.
Yeah, I guess who we got that from? Marty
Scorsese's
been doing that for decades. I think my favorite part of music in the entire film would be in the opening scene when you have that famous piano song. Dun, 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 dun. I think it's Beethoven, maybe. But everyone can recognize the piano song. And what happens is they do that theme, and then they finish the song with electric guitar. So it's a blend of just the piano, and then it's followed up by electric guitar finishing that theme. I think it's really brilliant, and a great way of depicting the two sides of that discussion, the two sides of that scene, and the two perspectives of that scene.
And this film is stacked in terms of the cast. The actors in this film are amazing. We have Christoph Waltz, who won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, Melanie Laurent, Brad Pitt, Eli Roth, Michael Fassbender, Diane Kruger, Daniel Bruhl. The cool thing about this is a lot of these people, these actors, they weren't huge stars yet. Obviously, Fassbender right now is very famous, especially with film buffs. And Diane Kruger, she was already pretty well known. She actually played Helen in Troy, if you ever seen that movie.
I think she had a National Treasure before this.
Yeah. And then Daniel Bruhl, he was actually in that racing movie that Ron Howard made.
That was well after this, though.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. So
Rush,
that got him exposed to American audiences.
And then Civil War.
Yeah, and this basically, Christoph Waltz basically exploded out of nowhere because he was really just a stage actor in Germany. He did a lot of TV movies, a lot of TV shows.
He was doing just mostly soap operas.
Yeah, he was just doing... TV movies are big in Germany, and he was doing like 1 or 2 a year. But that's about it. But aside from that, he was doing the stage, and he just exploded, and now he's just been... so many great characters since then. He's got 2 Oscars, but it seems like Tarantino just plucked this guy out of nowhere.
Part of the reason for casting him was because of his ability to speak in multiple languages. He is already fluent in German, French, and English. He didn't speak Italian before this movie, but he learned the lines of Italian in the third act of the film for this movie. Tarantino was actually thinking about casting DiCaprio as Hans Landa, but then he realized because DiCaprio actually is part German, and he can speak some German, but he's nowhere near fluent, but he just speaks a little bit of German, but nothing more than just casual conversation.
And it probably would sound awkward if he isn't a fluent German speaker. Now here's this dense script full of German and French language.
Yeah, exactly. So Tarantino realized I need someone who can bounce between these languages already, like as just a non-actor, someone who can already do this. And so that is what brought Christoph Waltz to audition for him. And then once he saw him reading out one of the scenes, he knew immediately that this was the guy because he effortlessly speaks these 3 languages and then the 4th Italian with such ease. And he's such, because different languages and dialects, they have different paces of speaking and different tones and inflections, and there's so much that goes into it, just not just speaking a different language, but and how you speak it. You know what I mean? And he like when he goes into Italian, it's like, wow, that's Italian. You know what I mean? He sounds like an Italian speaker speaking Italian. And the same thing with French. So I think that he's an innately talented as a linguist, which helped him get the role.
And just very intelligent. And he plays Colonel Hans Landa, who's easily the most interesting, terrifying character in the film. And in a way, you could call Hans Landa kind of like an evil version of Sherlock Holmes. He's very clever. He's very perceptive. He's energetic. He's also incredibly driven towards self-gain. They're both detectives, one for good, one for evil. He even talks about Nazis and the Fuhrer as they're his employer rather than an ideology that he believes in. So it seems like he's a character who is more focused on just finding success by whatever means his skill set is pushed to. And he's an Austrian Nazi, so he's not Austrian born. And Germany, the Nazi Germany, they took over Austria like the snap of their finger. They just walked in and they were greeted with cheers from the Austrians.
Yeah, the Austria citizens, a lot of them viewed the Nazis coming in as like they're a savior from how horribly their country had been run for decades.
And so you can imagine that Hans Landa was probably one of the best detectives, maybe a military policeman in Austria, and obviously his talents were going to be very useful for the Fuhrer in his plans and carrying out whatever he's doing in France.
There's a couple Sherlock Holmes references in the movie, and I think obviously the most visible of them is the pipe.
Yeah, it's the same pipe.
Yeah, same pipe. But Hans Landa, he's also a master manipulator, because whenever he puts himself into a confrontation, he makes it seem as though it's not a confrontation for the other person. Like he kind of like feigns innocence and professionalism and naivety to kind of trick the other party into like falling into a bit of an ease. And then when he's ready, he breaks his trap and he takes over the entire conversation or the situation. So for example, that scene with Le Petit, he's very professional. He's very bureaucratic. He's like, oh, I just need to write you off my list, and here's my paper. I just got to do this paperwork. And he makes it seem like it's very just like checking the boxes. Like, not being me. It's me being here is not even a big deal. But then he reveals that he had ulterior motives the entire time he was there. Same thing happens with when he encounters the Bastards at the cinema premiere, and he's asking Bridget about the injury, and he's pretending to be like nice and cordial, but it's obvious that he immediately was onto them, and it gets to the point where he's just like laughing about the whole situation, but he has his own ulterior motives. So he kind of like puts this persona in front of the other parties to kind of make them believe that he's not a threat to them until he is.
I think he likes to toy with his prey. I think that's in every one of his if you think about it, every one of his scenes is actually an interrogation. So Hans with La Petite, and then Hans with Emmanuel, who's also Shoshana at the restaurant, Hans with the German soldier at the bar after the shootout, Hans with the Bastards who are undercover at the movie premiere, Hans with Bridget von Hammersmark, Hans with Aldo and Udovic, and then the final scene is actually an interrogation that Aldo Rain has on Hans, where he's asking, what are you going to do with that handsome SS uniform?
We don't like that.
So every one of his scenes is pretty much an interrogation, and I think he likes to toy with his prey in different ways. I think the thing that he does when he walks into La Petite in their home is he obviously pays special attention to Charlotte because of the way she looks versus her sisters. He takes the milk and just drains it in one gulp. And then when you brought up the pipe, I think like Sherlock Holmes, I believe I watched an interview where Tarantino says that the significance of the pipe is that he takes it out only as a celebration because it's at that point that he's figured it out and he's won. And so that's why he takes out the pipe to celebrate.
It seems as though he's the most relaxed in that moment when he's lighting his pipe. Like he knows he won. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So that's a great point. And in terms of the milk, I think that him drinking the milk in one gulp is him exerting dominance, like complete dominance over this room by not just taking a sip, but downing the entire glass. It's kind of an intimidating thing to do.
And he just like stares at them.
Yeah. And you would expect him to drink liquor, and that's what's so surprising because he never drinks liquor. And he does grab a champagne flute at the cinema, but he never drinks from it. So you could think that maybe Hans Landa doesn't even drink alcohol.
Yeah, and the thing with Hans, he's very well-mannered. He's educated, clearly. He's eloquent, very polite. But he's also a murderous psychopath that treats other humans as below him. So it's in a way, if he didn't have that SS uniform, he'd come across as a perfect gentleman. And again, he's an opportunist. He probably wouldn't be doing this if the Nazi Party didn't exist. He'd probably be a detective. But I think he's so invested in just personal gain and success. And clearly being a detective for the Nazi Party is paying off. He lives high societies, eats in fancy restaurants. He has all these escapades with women in Germany and French women. So he's clearly been paid well, and he enjoys that aspect of his career.
But also, he doesn't like to get his hands too dirty. Because yes, he kills Bridget at the end of the film, but I think that was just extreme circumstances. He's trying to carry out his plan that he just came up with. That was an important role of his plan. And so, for example, in the scene with La Petite, he offers La Petite the chance to give up the family that he's hiding, and he says it's because he wants it. If La Petite can make his job any easier, he'll reward him for it.
And he also has this flair about his interactions with people when he's toying with them and when he's figuring things out. And it's like he's on stage and he's the lead actor in this play, and he's having so much fun, and he's very playful, and it's theatrical, and he's expressive with his hands, but then also he's very serious at times. Like when he's finally grilling Le Petit about where the Jews are underneath the floorboards, and he just flips on a dime into this very serious mode. It's terrifying to see.
And right when he does, Tarantino zooms in on him with a close up because the tone is completely changed. And I think my favorite part of the flare that you mentioned, it's got to be at the cinema when he hears that Bridget injured her leg from mountain climbing, and he bursts into such extravagant laughter. He takes 10 steps backwards and like nearly bumps into someone because he can't stop laughing so hard.
Because he knows that she's the one that got shot or is missing, and he's just like, I wonder what she's gonna say about this injury.
Yeah, and he's like, this is so ridiculous. Like these people are so stupid. Like I think he's looking at the four of them like they're complete idiots, all four of them. Like this is ridiculous.
He also likes to hear people talk about him, which is why he asked Le Petit if he knows who he is, what his job is, and then what his nickname is that's been given to him by the Jewish population, which is the Jew Hunter. And he even boasts about the title because he says he's deserved it. But later on in the film, when he's talking to Yudovich and Aldo Rain, he talks about how he hates the Jew Hunter for a nickname because he can't control what it is, but it also kind of it brings down in his mind what his job is and how hard he works in a way, or how difficult it is to carry out his job.
And I think he does that there because I think he has a certain amount of respect for Aldo to admit the truth to Aldo. Like, for what other reason would he tell Aldo that he hates the nickname than that he respects him on a certain level?
And his true loyalties, I think, only rely with himself. Like the prospect of ending the war, he jumps at that moment in a second because he's going to get out on a great deal. And you can imagine that because he's not ideologically invested in the Nazi party, he's not like a fanatic like a lot of the Nazi high class and German soldiers. He's objective and an opportunist, and he even calls the National Socialist Party of Germany tyrannical on the radio too. And when he's talking to Aldo and Yudovich, so he obviously thinks objectively and recognizes the Nazi party for what it is. So it possibly makes him even more evil that it doesn't bother him that he's using it to his advantage.
And I think someone as smart as him, he probably foresaw the eventual and imminent end of the Nazi party and how it would eventually come to fruition. So I think that when an opportunity to escape presented itself, he jumped on it for that reason.
Yeah, you can imagine he's been thinking that in a way. I need an out. And not only do I need an out, I need a way to cover my back so that I'm not in front of a tribunal later on and getting imprisoned or even taken out because of my horrible crimes.
Yeah.
And Hans Landa, he's very similar to Eamon Goth in Schindler's List. They're both Austrian. They have similar mannerisms. They're both very energetic at times and theatrical. But I think the main distinction is Hans works again for the Nazi parties for personal gain, whereas Eamon seems more of a believer, and they both use psychological warfare, but the main distinction between their methods is Hans is a detective, whereas Eamon is simply just a brutalizer of the imprisoned.
And Goth was real. He was a real person, and he's probably one of the most despicable person that ever lived on the planet of the Earth, on the planet. So it's a difficult time to even make a movie about or talk about, but I think that these movies have to get made so that it's important to remember history and the worst parts of history so that we can learn and grow from it. So I think characters like this, it's tough to see them on screen, but I think it's also necessary.
And there's a character that's very important to Hans Landa, and it's Shoshana, or Emmanuel, depending on what part of the film it is in. The way that she's sort of connected, obviously, with Hans Landa is that he murdered her family, but also the way he says adieu versus au revoir in that scene. And so adieu is a goodbye used in French for someone you don't know when you'll see them again. And obviously he uses that when he's telling his German soldiers to shoot the ground, to shoot the Nazis under the under the floorboards. But then he says au revoir to Shoshana when he's saying goodbye to her, which generally really translates until I see you again. And so the next scene that Hans Landa's in is actually when he sees Shoshana again at the restaurant.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that distinction between the goodbyes. That's really interesting.
So I think it ties into, obviously they're going to be connected later on in the film, but also did Hans recognize Emmanuel as Shoshana later on?
I don't think he recognized her. I think that he obviously is testing her in the cafe. Not a cafe, in the restaurant. I think he's testing her because she's such a young theater owner. It can be suspicious. And
yeah, I believe her papers say that she's like 18.
Yeah, actually 17, which is even more suspicious that someone that young owns a theater. But she explains it. So I think that Hans initially he's suspicious of her, but by the time they're eating, I think that he's not worried about her. He just thinks that she's very nervous around him because he's a German officer.
I think it's possible that he does recognize her because if you watch the scene, he orders her milk and he orders her a strudel, which at the time was made with pork fat, so he would know it's not kosher. She's clearly very uncomfortable. And then I think just the way that at the end of their conversation, after he's talking and asking about Frederick Zoller in her theater, he just gives her that same look that he gives La Petite at the beginning of the film, the very serious look, the glare, like he's just reading through her. And obviously you can assume, he says that, I forgot what I was going to ask you, but I think Hans Landa is such an intelligent guy. He always knows what he's going to say and what he's doing, that it seems unlikely that he lost his train of thought there. So I think maybe he's just curious where these events are going to lead to because he's an opportunist. And maybe he even knew about Operation Kino or heard wind of it before.
I mean, it's an interesting theory. I don't see how if he knew that she was a Jew, that he wouldn't let her go on the situation. And I don't think that he recognized her because he didn't see her face in the opening scene.
Well, he could have seen photos because if you think about it, he knows all the bastards by name without looking at their face.
But why didn't he have photos in the opening scene?
We don't know that.
He did. He had a whole book and all. He's literally writing down their names, asking the ages. So if he's
Tarantino didn't show us every single page in that folder.
I don't think that he saw Shoshana at all. I don't think there would have been a documented photo of her. There's just a name on a list, and he didn't see her. He just saw the back of her, so he doesn't know what she looks like. I mean, obviously he could probably detect that she's blonde, but I think that it's highly unlikely that he recognized her. I think he tests her in the beginning of the strudel scene, but I don't think he ends that scene knowing who she is.
Yeah, you're probably right. It's just fun to think about.
Yeah, it's fun to think about. I think that Tarantino having him order milk is kind of like a joke for us.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean? Because then Shoshana's reaction is like, and you kind of, when I saw it for the first time, I laughed.
No, yeah,
I think I laugh every time I see it. So I think it's a joke for us more than anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so Shoshana Dreyfus, a.k.a. Emmanuelle Mimieux. Sorry, I'm so bad at French pronunciation. And played by Melanie Laurent. Easily the most tragic character in the film. Shoshana narrowly escapes the slaying of her entire family in front of her eyes, and she's running away covered in blood. But she's only then continually hounded by Nazis in her new life because Frederick Zoller is trying to court her. And although Shoshana, she admirably sacrifices her life to kill the Nazi high command, her plan went completely unnoticed by anyone to acknowledge it. And no one living knows what she and Marcel did, sacrificing their lives with this plan.
Yeah, not even the bastards.
Yeah, she died a hero for no one to remember because she had no idea about Operation Kino, and Operation Kino had no idea about her. So in a way, she could represent the Jewish experience during the Holocaust of an entire population turned to ghost that has very few living people to remember them or the experiences.
Tarantino actually wrote Shoshana as, in the early drafts of the script, as more of a central figure in the French resistance and rebellious forces, and she was actually kind of like a hit woman in the French rebellion, and she would go out assassinating as many German officers and high commanders as she could, and she even would keep a list of all the names she killed. But then, like I said earlier, he wrote the first draft of the story before Kill Bill, and then when he made Kill Bill, he was like, Shoshana doing that in Inglourious would be way too close to Beatrix Kiddo in Kill Bill. So in order to deter comparisons to Beatrix, he changed Shoshana's story to be more of a personal one and more of a believable one. Because I mean, I love Kill Bill, but Beatrix Kiddo, it's not like a realistic character. It's a fun character, but that's the whole point. And so if that was set in this movie, it wouldn't really feel the same. And so I think he changed that to make it feel more grounded for Shoshana's storyline.
Yeah, her transformation from desperate survivor to mass murdering Nazi killer is extraordinary. And she has no hesitations when she decides that she wants to burn the entire theater down to kill all the people in the high command once she finds out that the Führer is going to be there. And you can imagine that she's just been biding her time, waiting for the opportunity to carry out revenge for her family, which is why I love the scene where she's getting ready for the movie premiere and she does her makeup like it's war paint for a second. And, David Bowie's Cat People is blasting. And she's such an incredible character. And she reminds me so much, obviously, of Beatrix Kiddo, but in Jackie, as well as Jackie Brown, too.
And one of my favorite moments of the film is actually a reference to the opening scene of the film. So when she's burning down the theater and the talking head is on the screen, her talking head is on the big theater screen. She speaks in English, and remember her partner, I can't remember his name. Marcel. He reminds her when they're filming the dialogue for the talking head to he's like, remember, speak in English. It's interesting because most German officers in high command didn't speak English, so they wouldn't have understood what she was saying. This actually, I think, is done on purpose by her because it's what Hans Landa did in the La Petite house when they spoke English so that Shoshana and her family, the other Dreyfuses, didn't know what they were saying before they were killed. And so I think that it's a calling card to how her family was killed by the Germans after they spoke English, and now she's killing the Germans after she speaks English.
Well, her storyline is very interesting because it also ties in with Friedrich Zoller, who's a Nazi war hero. He killed hundreds of Allied troops single-handedly. He's admired by German officers that outrank him, and even the French Nazi sympathizers, all the girlfriends of the German soldiers, and they get their autographs. And Shoshana is being courted by Friedrich Zoller, and she wants obviously nothing to do with him. And we have the scenes where she's watching Friedrich be hounded by fans and getting autographs, and once she learns about his exploits, she wants even less to do with him at the time.
You could argue Frederick is actually the most tragic character in the movie.
Besides Shoshana?
Yeah, because yes, he's a horrible person, and he's a Nazi, and he killed hundreds of American soldiers in Italy as a Nazi, but you could call him a tragic character in terms of, I think he really loves Shoshana deeply, and it's not just an infatuation. I think he's like full on in love with her. And that's why in the theater, in the back room, that's why he gets very aggressive and threatens her because she's rejecting him for the last time. And the woman he loves ends up shooting him like 5 times in the chest. So I think that you could look at Frederick as a tragic character in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that he does show he's human in a way because of the way he feels about Shoshana, but also because, he does show he's human when he's watching Nation's Pride and he can't watch the killing because it reminds him of what he's done. And it doesn't make him a completely heartless man that enjoys killing people. But again, he did murder 500 people or something like that.
250.
250 total. So he's not a good guy, obviously. But I think Tarantino created this like Romeo and Juliet situation with Frederick and Shoshana, this like love that could never happen. And then even the way they die, it's very similar to Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet fakes her death and Romeo comes to find Juliet, who has drunk the sleep serum to appear dead. Romeo kisses Juliet, drinks the poison, kisses Juliet once more before dying. Then Juliet wakes to find Romeo dead, kisses him, and then stabs herself with a dagger. It's very similar to the way Shoshana shoots Frederick. Frederick fakes being dead only to shoot Shoshana multiple times. And then they both die. Tarantino gets that brilliant overhead ceiling shot looking down at them both.
That was such a surprise. And you're great. That's a great correlation. That's a great parallel to Romeo and Juliet. I think you're 100% accurate with that.
I think it's 100% spot on.
In terms of the film Nation's Pride, it wasn't actually made by Tarantino. He actually tapped Eli Roth to make the movie. So Eli Roth and his brother shot the film Nation's Pride with Daniel Bruhl, and they did it over, I think, 2 days, and they shot so many different setups. I think they shot over 200 setups because Tarantino wanted the film he didn't want it to play like, oh, it's a short film. It needs to be it needs to look like it was a 2.5 hour long movie, and we just showed different bits of it. So it needs a lot of different camera angles and shots and all these different looks to make it seem bigger than it really is.
Now let's talk about the bastards. Let's get them Nazis. Starting with Aldo Rain, Aldo the Apache. And so Aldo Rain, played by the great Brad Pitt, is terrific in this movie. He exudes cool like usual in every role he's in. And he makes the Nazi hunting business seem like so much fun. And, business is a booming. Aldo is part Native American, plus enjoys the act of scalping Nazis like the Apache, hence his nickname, Aldo the Apache. And the first thing we notice about Aldo in this film when we see him is he's got this giant scar across his neck, which is from an attempted hanging, we can assume, or lynching, because he was fighting in the KKK back in America before World War II started. So I believe the backstory is that he was tried to be hung by the KKK.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. And I think Aldo in this film, he represents punishment. And I think he represents justice because his whole goal is to kill as many Nazis as possible. I said Nazis.
It's fun to say Nazis.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep saying
Like
that.
the
Kill as
movie.
many Nazis as possible. And then the ones that do get away or the ones that they do let free, he marks them with that swastika cut into their forehead. So I think that even if a Nazi isn't punished by them, he will find a way for them to still face some kind of discipline, even if they are freed.
Yeah, despite his reputation, he actually only kills one person. He kills the on screen. He shoots the driver, the radio guy that
in
is
front of
part of the
Hans
deal.
Landa, yeah.
He's like, they don't give a crap about him. They only care about you. So he actually only kills one person on screen, whereas the Bastards kill much more. And
But you can argue that he's the captain of the squad, so
Yeah.
he's responsible for
he's
every
clearly a violent, brutal, apathetic guy when it comes to the Nazis. But he's also intelligent. Like, he knows what loquacious means, which you wouldn't expect someone who's moonshining in Tennessee to know what that word means. He's very patriotic, and he has no qualms about just killing as many Nazis as possible with glee. He's also very charming and a little arrogant because he thinks he can get by speaking Italian when he doesn't speak really a word of Italian.
And also he shows his arrogance when after he kills the driver and Hans Landa's like, what are you doing? He thinks that Aldo is going to get severely punished for it. And Aldo just goes, nah, I'll probably be chewed out. I've been chewed out before. Tarantino, I think, has confirmed that Aldo Raine is the grandfather of Floyd. And Floyd was played by Brad Pitt in True Romance. He's that pothead roommate.
Oh, the stoner.
Yeah, the stoner lying on the couch. And apparently Aldo is his either grandfather or great-grandfather.
And I wonder if Cliff Booth is just like the character in some ways is just like an Easter egg in a way to Aldo Raine, because obviously they speak very similarly. They have a very similar tone. Obviously it's Brad Pitt, but he also has like the Native American tattoo on his arm, the chief, and then kind of like his shoes are very Native American-esque style in a way. So maybe it's just kind of a reference back to Aldo.
I would say no. I would say that the tattoo would be a reference to Western films, and I mean it could be a nod. I don't think the accent is close enough to be a reference because Cliff, he has a hint of an accent, but it's not too much of. You can't really determine where he's from, whereas Aldo is definitely from the South. So, I mean, it could be, but I would say it probably isn't. But one of my favorite things about Aldo is that he sniffs something a few times in the movie, and it's like, what is he sniffing cocaine? But what he's sniffing is ground up tobacco.
Oh, I always thought he was like doing cocaine or something.
No, yeah. So it's tobacco grounds.
That must have been common in war times. Then.
Yeah, it was. And also that in that cinema scene at the premiere, Aldo was wearing that white tuxedo with the red flower on it. And this is Tarantino referencing James Bond when Sean Connery wore this same white suit with the red flower. And then Daniel Craig wore this suit in Spectre. And then also Harrison Ford wore the same suit in Temple of Doom. So they're all references to Sean Connery's James Bond.
Aldo's not really in a ton of this film if you think about it, but until the third act, really, when we're at the movie theater, movie premiere. He has like the scene with the bastards in the beginning talking about what they're going to be doing when they get in, and then that great scene where they're interrogating the Nazis while they're in France to try to find out the other crop patrol that's around here somewhere. And so besides that, he doesn't have a huge role until we're in the third act in Operation Kino.
I mean, that's the way Tarantino, I think, loves to write his movies. The same thing with Pulp Fiction. Like, if you think about, like, Vincent Vega, like, he's in the movie and then he's not in the movie for a long time, you know? And that's just the way he likes to write his movies. And I think when you have an ensemble, I think what most writers will do is they try to give everyone as much screen time as possible, because an ensemble means you have a cast of several actors who are very prominent actors in their prominent parts of the movie. So let's give them a few minutes here and then give them a scene, then give them a scene. So I think they try to evenly space it out as much as they can, where Tarantino's like, whenever he becomes relevant, you'll see him. You know what I mean? So he doesn't try to squeeze them into the movie to be like evenly seen.
And I love how he does the swastika on the Nazis' foreheads, because he believes so much in the evil of the Nazi party that no matter what you've done, and if you've repented or you've made a deal, nothing should absolve you of what you've done in your crimes. And that's the whole point of the swastika on the forehead.
Isn't it true that Adam Sandler was originally cast as one of the bastards?
He wasn't cast. He was actually offered the Bear Jew, Donnie Donovan, but he couldn't do it because I think he was filming like Grown Ups 2 or something, or Grown Ups. One of those movies.
I hope he got paid a lot.
But so it's just he couldn't do it timing wise. But there's actually a great deep fake of Adam Sandler as the Bear Jew in the whole scene. It's actually really incredible.
That would have been funny. I like Eli Roth. He did a pretty good Boston accent. It was pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. A little over the top, but yeah, he's a solid actor.
Yeah.
He's a great director too.
Yeah, he's an awesome director. And BJ Novak, who's famous for being Ryan on The Office, plays one of the bastards too.
Dudovich.
Yeah, he was when he was cast in this and he was filming. They explained it was filming at the same time as The Office production. And so they explained Ryan's absence in The Office as it's that moment when they're like, oh, he's traveling, he's in Thailand with friends.
Yeah.
So that's when they say that in The Office, he was actually making this.
Yeah, and the Bear Jew's great, played by Eli Roth. And besides the Bear Jew, Hugo Stiglitz is a great bastard too. And the cool thing about him is I think that Tarantino wanted to make characters like him and Bridget von Hammersmark, who, to show that not all Germans bought into the Nazi party. They were against it, but they had to kind of hide their identity or show face out of survival. But Hugo probably at that point can't take enough of it, and so he ends up just murdering as many high class officers as he can.
I love the Sam Jackson narration of his little backstory.
Everyone in the German army knows Hugo Stiglitz,
and that actor Till Schwelger. He's a famous German actor. You've seen it. I've seen him in a ton of stuff. I think he's one of those actors in American movies that like you've seen them in a ton of stuff, but you can't remember their name. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I definitely recognized him when I saw him in this movie, and he's always said that he never wanted to play a Nazi, and he only accepted this role on the condition that he kills a Nazi in every scene he's in. And so Tarantino agreed. He's okay. Every scene you're in, you get to kill a Nazi. And a really cool fact about Donnie Donovan is Tarantino cut, I think, maybe 40 minutes from his original cut. And a lot of the footage was backstory on some of the bastards. And Donnie Donovan had a great little backstory where it went to a flashback to, I think I can't remember what part of Boston he's from, but he's in a Jewish neighborhood in Boston. And that baseball bat he uses, it's in this scene, and it's, the way to depict it is that he's a baseball player, and not professionally, but he's been drafted for the war, and his neighbors and family tell him to kill as many Nazis as he can, and that's when he decides that he's gonna write a notch into the bat every time he kills one.
And that thing is full of notches.
Yeah.
And then we get British intelligence involved with Operation Kino with Archie Hickox, who's played by the great Michael Fassbender. This was his big breakout role. Obviously, he was in some films by Steve McQueen, but not a lot of people had seen them yet. Like
300.
Yeah, but this was his first, I think, big explosion to American audiences. And I love how he's introduced by the shock of seeing Winston Churchill in the same room as him. And you can imagine what that's like for a British soldier. And then we learn that he's fluent in German. He's a film critic. He studied German film. And then we get the briefing with Operation Kino, where Bridget von Hammersmark, a German movie star, is a British spy.
And I love Mike Myers in this scene because his accent is so like over the top, and just from your familiarity of him playing Austin Powers, I think that Tarantino hired him as just like, let's have fun for a little bit. I mean, it's so much fun to see him in this role. And I love how Winston Churchill's in there, but he's just in the background, and he only says, brief him. That's it.
How's he doing? I bet a lot of people don't even realize that.
I didn't the first time I saw it. I was like, who was that old guy? And then I had to look it up, and I was like, oh, that was Winston Churchill. And then you're like, he's smoking a cigar.
And
okay.
He's huge, and he's wearing a suit. Yeah, British intelligence. But Archie's a great character. He's very eloquent, and he's very fast thinking on his feet, obviously. In the pub scene when he's trying to explain to the Nazi officer that he's from Pittsburgh. That's why his accent sounds funny. And then we have the pub scene, which is, it's hard to decide which scene's better, the opening scene or the pub scene in terms of dialogue and tension. And they're both phenomenal. And I tend to think that the opening scene's my favorite because it just sets this world up so amazingly, and the characters so well. And but I love this pub scene as well, and Diane Kruger is phenomenal as von Hammersmark.
I would say the difference between the scenes is with the pub scene, the tension is there immediately because right when they walk into the bar, they see Nazi soldiers.
Yeah.
Whereas the opening scene, Tarantino waits like 5 minutes or so until he reveals the Jews under the floorboards. So the tension's there, but it's not as dangerous of a situation we think until we see the Jews. And then the suspense and the tension grows. But I think with the bar scene, the tension is there immediately. So I think that's the main difference, is the whole thing is just like you're on the edge of like what's going to happen.
Yeah, and Von Hammersmark is really interesting because she's an actor. So
I want to talk about Archie Cox first.
sorry,
I haven't been able to say anything about him yet. Ironically, Hickox is found out as being a spy because of his poor accent, which he hasn't. Initially, the hint is because the first clue is his poor accent, which he isn't able to hide. And this is ironic because Michael Fassbender was actually born in Germany and raised in Germany until he was in like a teenager, and then he moved to Ireland. So his first language is actually German, and so he's especially talented at being able to speak in a perfect German accent, which is ironic because his character isn't able to. And then the problem with Archie is he is an overly confident person to the point of his own failure, and he's an overly arrogant person. So, for example, he thinks that he is an expert on German culture, which is why he thinks he's suited for this mission, and seems supremely confident he'll be able to carry it out. And aside from the accent, he's able to explain that away. And then Hellstrom, the SS officer, believes him eventually.
Because Von Hammersmark, too. Having that kind of an ally is very persuasive.
Exactly. So they're able to explain that away to Hellstrom. But then Hellstrom famously recognizes that Archie uses the wrong 3. He uses a British 3 hand signal instead of the German 3. And so that was what made Hellstrom discover that he was a spy. And this is ironic because Archie believed himself to be an expert on German culture, but he only knew German culture through German films. And so he never was exposed to a nuanced part of being German as giving the right hand signal for the number 3. And so even though he's supremely confident, it ends up biting him in the ass at the end.
And Von Hammersmark, she's also very confident, but she's kind of got like 2 personalities, which you can probably argue that a lot of actors do because they have like the public persona, the talk show persona. It's very charming and very witty, like she is in the pub scenes, and she knows how to talk to a table full of people and entertain them, or a room full of people and entertain them. And then there's the other personality where they're not bubbly, they're not charming, and she's kind of just cynical. Like she says, she's like, I like drinking, ordering restaurants, and something else. So she's not really like that personality that she shows. As it seems like a facade, and like a lot of her life is an act to not be found out that she's a British spy actually undercover.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actors do have a duality about them in terms of public persona and real persona, and then even the actor acting in a scene. So there's actually probably 3 personas they have. And the thing with Hammersmark is Bridget von Hammersmark was actually based on a real person, not an actor, but a very famous Dutch dancer who ended up providing valuable intelligence to Allied forces during the war.
And Tarantino actually references 2 classical romantic films. Obviously, we talked about Romeo and Juliet, but he also references Cinderella, the fairy tale with Hammersmark, when Hans Landa puts the shoe on her foot, and he says, and it fits. So he actually references 2 classical love stories.
When he tells her to reach in his coat pocket and pull out what she finds, and then you can see her face when she realizes it's the heel. And it's like, oh my God. And she pulls it out. And then she's like, okay, I'm fucked. I'm dead.
And why do you think that Hans kills Bridget? Because maybe it's because she's a traitor, or maybe also, like you said earlier, that he's trying to tie up the loose ends for his plan that he's carrying out during Operation Kino while the Nazi high command's watching the film, that he's, improvising on the spot. But also maybe for her denying his advances for years, which she actually hints at in their conversation at the movie theater lobby, when she's like, "Oh, I've known too many of your past flames to keep falling for that."
I would say he kills her just out of vengeance for betraying their country.
But again, he's not very ideological.
I guess.
I think it's because of the advances in that he never got her. You know what I mean? Because he's always like going after women. That's what they insinuate multiple times in the film.
Well, I would say that, so even though he's not extremely passionate about the Nazi regime, I think that Hans Landa views anyone that is opponent of I think he views someone who is his opponent as someone who's like a Jew. So maybe for him, Bridget became comparable to a Jew.
It's possible because he doesn't have to kill her. She could survive and have a life in America. You know, it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about and think about.
Yeah, I never thought about why he killed her.
I'm still going with because she never accepted his advances, and you can assume.
Is that what you would do?
Oh my god, dude! I still think it's because her denying his advances for years, which I think you can assume has been going on for probably a decade between them, because he's high up in high society and they're old friends, you know.
And the scene in which Hans Landa actually chokes, not the scene, and the moment in which Hans Landa actually chokes Bridget, is actually Tarantino on set was given permission by Diane Kruger. She allowed him to actually physically, for real, choke her. So she did not have air for several moments during the scene, and Tarantino, when he felt that he got the shot he wanted, he let go and they cut the camera. And so it's a very complicated situation where did he go too far, and what is like a line in that situation?
Yeah, it's very questionable. I would prefer that directors, he does this in Kill Bill too. In Kill Bill, when Beatrix Kiddo gets choked with the chain, he's the one that's holding the chain. So I think it's very questionable, and I'm not a huge fan of directors sort of inserting themselves in stunt work. Of course, he got the permission of both Uma Thurman and Diane Kruger in the scenes and the moments, but still, I would prefer, if I was making a film, I would leave that to professionals, to experts, and other actors or stunt people.
I agree. I think that an expert or a trained professional should be doing something like that for sure.
I love the third act of this movie because there's so many intense moments happening, these storylines that are all intersecting finally, and Tarantino just makes it so fun at the same time, where the bastards who Donnie and Omar are dressed up in the tuxedos. They're Italians. They're like going through the audiences in the movie theater and scusi, pardon, and they can't speak Italian even though they're supposed to be Italians. And then at the same time, they have dynamite strapped to their ankles. And also Shoshana, her and Marcel are planning to light the fire to burn down the entire theater. But it's so light and fun at times, in addition to it being very serious and a lot of people are about to die in a moment.
And also this movie contains a great Mexican standoff in that bar scene, and Mexican standoffs are a trademark of Tarantino. Nearly every single one of his movies has a very intense Mexican standoff, or multiple. And so, for example, in Reservoir Dogs, it has multiple Mexican standoffs. The whole movie is basically a Mexican standoff. Pulp Fiction, the opening diner scene is a Mexican standoff, and also the final scene in Kill Bill, that final battle, you could say, is a Mexican standoff. And then the hotel room scene in Kill Bill 2, when she's trying to tell the other assassin that she just found out she's pregnant. Death Proof doesn't have a Mexican standoff scene, but this scene in Bastards, Django, you could say the ending shootout is a Mexican standoff. Hateful Eight, there are multiple Mexican standoffs. And then in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you could say that the final scene is a Mexican standoff, because although Cliff doesn't have a gun, he does have the dog at the ready. Want to do fun facts?
Yeah, let's do fun facts. We all know how this ends with, obviously, Hans Landa makes the deal, but that's a bingo. Aldo Rain will not let him get away without walking around with the Nazi uniform for the rest of his life by signing his masterpiece into his forehead with his giant knife. Etching his masterpiece.
When Aldo says, I think that might be my masterpiece, I think that's Tarantino saying that to us.
I think
that this is his masterpiece. This is the only movie that Brad Pitt has made as a leading actor with the Weinstein Company, or its previous iteration, Miramax, and those companies were headed by Harvey Weinstein, and they had a very tumultuous relationship because Harvey Weinstein harassed Gwyneth Paltrow, and then Brad Pitt confronted Weinstein and threatened him that if he ever did it again, he would kick his ass. And so Brad Pitt always refused to ever work with Harvey Weinstein, but he only said yes to this because it was Tarantino.
Obviously, we all know that the title for Inglourious Basterds, both words are misspelled on purpose, and writer-director Quentin Tarantino gave this following answer when asked about it. He said, "Here's the thing, I'm never going to explain that. You do an artistic flourish like that, and to explain it would just take the piss out of it and invalidate the whole stroke in the first place."
The first
German soldier that is scalped in the movie is actually a realistic looking dummy version of Quentin Tarantino. The role of Shoshana Dreyfus's father, Jacob, who's very briefly seen hiding beneath the floorboards in the La Petite farmhouse, was played by Patrick Elias, whose father, Buddy Elias, was a first cousin of Anne Frank. Quentin Tarantino was actually considering abandoning the film entirely because he couldn't find the right actor to play Hans Landa, figuring that he wrote a role that was unplayable. But then when he found Christoph Waltz and saw his audition, he agreed that he found the perfect actor finally. Simon Pegg was actually originally set to play Lieutenant Archie Hickox, but was forced to pull out of the project because of scheduling conflicts with the Adventures of Tintin, which, you know, was a good movie, but this was great. It's unfortunate. He probably would have been phenomenal as it.
Yeah, he would have been great. That makes, I mean, I would guess he got cast originally because Tarantino and Edgar Wright are very good friends, and he loves Shaun of the Dead. It's one of his favorite movies.
And that ends our episode on Inglourious Basterds. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Go to our website, Raiders of the Lost Podcast. Check out all of our merch, our movie posters. Become a patron at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody.
Take care, everyone.